There are places that remember you long after you've forgotten them. And some have been waiting for you by name. If the darkness gathering here feels familiar, if it speaks to something restless behind your ribs, then perhaps you were always meant to find us. Step behind the mask. Subscribe to Grim Masquerade and let the shadows know your face. Leave your mark, a like pressed into this night like a fingerprint on cold glass. Strike the bell so when the next whisper comes, it finds you before the silence does. And if, when this story ends, you feel something standing just behind you that wasn't there before, leave your confession in the comments. The Masquerade forgets no one. Now, lower the lights. Draw close. Tonight, we visit a building that never learned how to stop, and the names it calls out belong to the dead. I want to be very clear about something before I tell you any of this. I am not a paranormal investigator. I'm not a ghost hunter. I don't have a podcast. I don't run a YouTube channel about abandoned places. And until 11 months ago, I had never once in my adult life believed in anything I couldn't explain with common sense, a search engine, and a halfway decent understanding of how the world actually works. My name is Joel Marin. I'm 34 years old. I work as a civil engineer for Condaran County's Department of Infrastructure and Transit Planning, which is a title that sounds considerably more important than the work itself. What I actually do, most days, is drive out to aging public structures scattered across the county. Condemned bridges, crumbling overpasses, decommissioned buildings sitting on county-owned land, and write reports about whether they should be demolished, renovated, or simply left to decay in a way that is unlikely to injure a passing motorist or a curious teenager. I measure load-bearing tolerances. I photograph rusted rebar. I tap walls with a rubber mallet and listen carefully to the sound the wall makes. And from that sound, I can tell you whether the structure has another decade of useful life or whether it's one hard frost from becoming a liability. Claim it is boring work. I need you to genuinely understand that. It is deeply, methodically, beautifully boring, and I have loved every hour of it for the 9 years I've held this position. Because boring means predictable, and predictable means the world is constructed from materials that obey known principles. Concrete cures at calculable rates. Steel fatigues along measurable curves. Wood rots from the outside in. Everything follows rules, and if you understand the rules, nothing can surprise you. That certainty was the bedrock I built my entire professional identity upon, and it held firm beneath my feet for nearly a decade. It was the last Monday in September when my supervisor, Linda Hargrove, dropped a manila folder on the corner of my desk and told me I was being sent to assess the Calvary Depot. The Calvary Interstate Bus Depot sits at the end of a deteriorating 2-lane access road, approximately 9 miles east of Calvary, Kentucky, a community of perhaps 300 people tucked into a narrow river valley in the Appalachian foothills, the sort of place that doesn't appear on GPS navigations, unless you deliberately type the name. The depot was built in 1961 as a regional hub for southeastern trailways, back when interstate bus travel served as the circulatory system of rural America. Before the interstate highways were completed, before every household owned 2 automobiles, the trailways network was how scattered communities stayed alive. Young reached boot camp, and how elderly women attended their sisters' funerals, and how everyone in between got to everywhere they needed to be. At its peak in the early 70s, the Calvary Depot processed roughly 140 passengers daily. People traveling between Louisville, Lexington, Knoxville, and all the small towns threaded like beads along the routes in between. The facility included a ticket counter with a Formica service bar, a small cafe with a 6-stool lunch counter, a newsstand selling paperback novels and cigarettes, 2 public restrooms, a maintenance bay for minor mechanical service, and a public address system that announced every arrival and departure across 6 covered bus bays. For 26 years, that PA system served as the depot's heartbeat, a woman's steady voice echoing under the concrete awning, calling out route numbers, station names, and passenger surnames, marking the rhythm of departure and arrival that kept a community in motion. The last official bus departed Calvary Depot on March 14, 1988. Southeastern Trailways had been absorbed by Greyhound the previous year, and most of the smaller depots along secondary lines were quietly closed. Calvary was no exception. The building was locked up, the remaining staff reassigned or released, and Hardin County assumed nominal ownership of the parcel through a default property transfer that nobody bothered to contest or even particularly notice. That was 38 years ago. In the decades since, the depot had been used exactly once, briefly in 1996 as a staging point during a regional flood evacuation, and then forgotten again, abandoned at the end of its crumbling access road like a thought that was never completed. Now, the county wanted a demolition assessment. A regional developer had expressed tentative interest in the land, contingent on the structure being cleared and the soil tested for contamination. My assignment was straightforward: inspect the building's condition, take measurements and photographs, and produce a standard structural risk assessment. Linda estimated 3 days. She told me to book a room in Calvary, take the county vehicle, and have the completed report on her desk by the following Tuesday. She said it briskly, without eye contact, already reaching for the next file on her stack. Just another assignment. I wrote the address in my planner and treated it accordingly. I left before dawn on Wednesday, the sky still purple-black above the eastern ridge, the air cool and damp with the particular freshness that only exists in the first minutes after you've locked the front door, and the day hasn't started yet. I stopped at the Speedway station on Route 31 for gas, a large black coffee, and a cellophane-wrapped blueberry muffin, and I ate one-handed while merging south onto the state highway. My equipment rode in a cardboard box in the back seat. Laser distance meter, steel tape measure, pin-type moisture probe, digital camera with spare battery, clipboard, and the dog-eared structural assessment template I'd used on so many jobs that the page corners had softened to cloth. On the passenger seat, my thermos of home-brewed coffee sat next to a folded Rhodes atlas I never consulted, but always brought, one of those irrational habits that substitutes for comfort. The drive took just over 2 hours, most of it on 2-lane state roads winding through tobacco country bottomland and small towns marked by a single traffic signal and a Family Dollar. I listened to an engineering podcast about load distribution in pre-stressed bridge decks, the sort of content that would put most people to sleep, but that settled my mind the way some people use classical music. The sky started clear, but gradually thickened as I moved south, and by the time I made the turn off the state highway onto the depot's access road, the clouds had sealed themselves into one flat, oyster shell gray sheet that drained the color from everything beneath it. The trees lining the road, mostly oak and hickory, still holding their late September leaves, looked like charcoal sketches against that pale sky, as though the landscape had been drawn rather than grown. The access road itself was barely passable. The asphalt had fractured into irregular, tilting plates, with crabgrass and chickweed forcing through every seam. I eased the truck down to 15 miles an hour to protect the undercarriage. No other tire tracks, no houses, no mailboxes, no power lines, no driveways turning off into the woods, just trees and silence, and the faint hum of absolute geographic emptiness, that specific quality of quiet you only encounter in places where human activity has completely withdrawn. The depot appeared around a long, sweeping bend, and I pulled into what had once been the passenger lot. The pavement here was in worse condition than the road, shattered into uneven slabs that tilted at conflicting angles, like sheets of ice on a partially thawed pond. A few concrete lane dividers remained upright, their yellow paint reduced to faint, flaking smears. Dandelions and foxtail grass had colonized every crack. The building itself was larger than the file photographs had suggested. A long, single-story rectangle with a flat roof edged by a low parapet and a concrete awning extending over the bus bays along the far side. The walls were institutional cream brick, a color common in early 60s public construction, darkened now by 4 decades of weather and biological growth to a mottled, uneven tan. What struck me first were the windows. Most of them were intact. In my experience, abandoned buildings lose their glass within the first several years. Thrown rocks, settling foundations, temperature stress, bored teenagers, but these panes were whole. A few had developed hairline fractures from their corners, and the glazing putty had dried to powder in the frames, but the glass itself was unbroken. The windows regarded the empty lot with a clouded, patient stillness, like eyes that had stopped expecting anything but hadn't stopped looking. The main entrance was a pair of aluminum-framed glass doors with interior push bars, chained shut with a padlock that had rusted into a solid, fused mass, shackle welded to body by years of oxidation, no longer a lock so much as a single corroded sculpture. I sat in the truck for several minutes, finishing my thermos coffee, studying the building through the windshield. Nothing about the scene was unusual. It looked precisely like what it was, an old public building that time and economics had passed by. I've assessed dozens like it. They share a common quality, an exhausted stillness, the architectural equivalent of a breath that was held and never released. I climbed out, boots grinding on loose gravel, and retrieved my gear from the back. The air was cooler than expected, low 50s, carrying a faint mineral scent of old concrete and standing water from somewhere in the tree line. I shrugged on my reflective safety vest out of habit, though the nearest human being was miles away, and selected the county-issued bolt cutters from my toolbox. The chain snapped with a dry, brittle crack, and the severed links rang sharply against the aluminum frame. I pushed the right-hand door inward. The rubber weather seal, bonded to the threshold by decades of compression, resisted stubbornly, then released with a long, gritty screech that bounced off the concrete awning behind me and rolled away into the lot like something fleeing. The smell arrived immediately. Not decay, not mildew, not the ammonia sourness of animal habitation. Something far older and more neutral. Stale air that had been sealed inside a closed volume for years, compressed and homogenized until it had developed its own character. Mineral dust, old upholstery fabric, the faintest chemical ghost of institutional floor cleaner. And beneath everything, a dry sweetness that might have been aged paper or the remnants of vintage tile adhesive. I wedged the door open with a chunk of broken curbing from the lot and stepped across the threshold. The main lobby was dim but navigable. Flat gray daylight filtered through the front windows, illuminating the space without warming it. The floor was poured concrete beneath a layer of commercial vinyl tile, speckled beige, largely intact, though several tiles near the entrance had curled at their edges to reveal the dark mastic beneath. To my left stood the ticket counter, a long Formica bar in faded mint green, with a hinged staff access section, and a built-in shelf where passengers had once rested their luggage while purchasing tickets. Behind the counter, a pegboard on the wall retained a few wire hooks, and above it, a clock. Round, white-faced, black-numbered, the standard issue timepiece of American institutional buildings was stopped at 2:47. There was no way to determine whether that was morning or afternoon, or what day or what year. Just 2:47 permanently. To my right, a row of molded plastic chairs in burnt orange, bolted in groups of 4 to shared metal rails, lined the wall beneath the windows. Most remained intact. A few had developed stress fractures. The plastic dried brittle and split along invisible grain lines. They were designed for temporary waiting. They had ended up waiting permanently, holding the shapes of absent bodies. Directly ahead, a short corridor led past the restrooms and what the file's floor plan labeled as the former cafe. Beyond that, a set of double doors with wire-reinforced glass panels opened onto the covered bay area where buses had once idled and passengers had boarded. I set up my tripod, mounted the camera, and shot 4 establishing photographs, one in each cardinal direction from the lobby's center point. Then I began the real work, the slow, methodical accumulation of measurements and observations that forms the spine of every structural assessment I've ever written. I checked ceiling tiles for water staining and found almost none, just a faint ring of discoloration near the northwest corner, suggesting a minor, long-dried roof intrusion. I tested the floor for soft spots, pressing firmly with my boot heel every few feet, listening for the hollow note that signals a subsurface void. Nothing. Solid throughout. I examined walls for structural cracking, the kind that runs diagonally from door frames and window headers when foundations settle, and found only minor cosmetic fractures in the surface plaster. The building was in remarkably good condition. Better, in fact, than many structures half its age that I've assessed. The roof had held. The foundation showed no appreciable movement. The walls were plumb and true. I noted this in my field book with something approaching admiration. The builders had done their work well. The bones of this place were sound. I had been working for nearly 3 hours, moving methodically through the lobby and into the corridor. When the silence broke, I was near the restroom doors, stretching my tape measure across a door frame and recording the width in my field book when a sound cut the air so suddenly and so completely that I flinched hard enough to drop the tape. It hit the tile with a sharp clatter that I barely registered, because every particle of my attention had been commandeered by what was pouring from the PA speakers set into the ceiling above me. A voice, female, clipped, professional, gently authoritative, the tone of mid-century public service, arriving Bay 4, Southeastern Trailways service from Knoxville, 12:17 p.m. The words reverberated briefly in the tiled corridor, then faded. The silence that rushed into the space they vacated was not the same silence as before. It was denser, more intentional, as though the building had spoken and was now listening carefully for my reply. I need to be precise about my reaction, because precision is all I have. I was not frightened. I was bewildered. My first instinct was mechanical. a capacitor discharging in degraded circuitry, a corroded relay closing under thermal expansion, some dying electrical spasm in a system that had been decaying for decades. I've encountered phantom alarms in decommissioned buildings, security sensors triggered by temperature shifts years after the power was cut. Electronics behave unpredictably at the end of their lives. It's physics. It's mundane. I picked up my tape measure, walked to the lobby, and studied the nearest ceiling speaker. A standard commercial horn in beige plastic, recessed into a bracket. Its grill furred with dust. Then I ducked behind the ticket counter and entered the back office. Small room, metal desk with faux wood laminate. Two-drawer filing cabinet, a rotary telephone with its handset cord severed. A wall calendar still turned to November 1987, displaying a scenic photograph of Cumberland Falls. On a shelf above the desk sat the PAA unit, a Bogan commercial paging amplifier from the mid-70s, housed in a rectangular steel case. I pulled it forward and examined the back panel. The power cord ended in a blackened, frayed stump roughly 6 inches from the casing, cut or torn at some undetermined point. Individual copper strands splayed like the filaments of a damaged nerve. And there was no electrical service to the building, regardless. I had confirmed this with county utilities before my departure. Service disconnected in 1909, meter removed, entrance cable severed at the weatherhead. This building had not received a single watt of electricity in 37 years. I inspected the amplifier's internals through its ventilation slots. Swollen electrolytic capacitors, their casings bulging with age. Circuit board cracked across 2 solder traces. Dust thick enough to muffle any signal, even if one existed. This machine was not merely inactive. It was dead. Conclusively, irreversibly dead. I would have staked every professional credential I possess on that assessment. I returned the unit to its shelf, stood in the small office, and listened. The building was silent. Through the window behind the desk, I could see a narrow slice of the empty lot. The darkening tree line, a single crow crossing the gray sky. I built the most rational explanation I could. Auditory pareidolia, environmental acoustics, a freak channeling of external sound through the building's geometry. And I filed it in the part of my mind marked Investigate Tomorrow. Then I returned to my work, letting the physical rhythm of measurement and documentation stabilize me. Measure, record, photograph, advance. The second announcement came at 3:41 that afternoon. I was in the Bus Bay area, photographing overhead support beams, when the speakers beneath the awning crackled alive, with a sound like someone crumpling stiff paper very close to a microphone. Arriving, Bay 2, Southeastern Trailways service from Louisville, with stops in Elizabethtown, Hodgenville, and Campbellsville. 3:41 p.m. passengers: Donnelly, R. Prater, M. Prater, J. Harmon, T. The voice was clearer here, or perhaps I was simply more attuned. I could hear the cadence of a person who had spoken these words thousands of times. The fluid elision between Southeastern and Trailways, the metered rhythm of station names, the brief pause before each passenger surname. The accent was not quite Southern, Appalachian adjacent, the vowels shaped by ridgelines and hollow roads, and beneath the professional composure, barely detectable but present, a tightness, a held quality, as if the speaker were performing normalcy over something that was not normal at all. This time, the voice had listed names, specific, alphabetized passenger names. I lowered my camera and walked to the nearest bay speaker, standing directly beneath it, close enough to see individual holes in the plastic grill. I reached up and pressed my fingertips against it. The plastic was cold, distinctly, meaningfully colder than the ambient air, and beneath the cold I felt a tremor. Not electrical. Something deeper, more organic, like the fading vibration of a bell struck minutes ago. Then it stopped. The coldness warmed under my fingertips. The tremor ceased. I went back to the office. The PA unit sat dead on its shelf. I pulled it down again, set it on the desk, and examined every component under my flashlight. Nothing had changed. Swollen capacitors, cracked traces, corroded resistors. This machine had not produced a signal in decades. I returned it to the shelf and stood in the office doorway, looking across the empty lobby at the stopped clock and the dust-covered chairs and the flat gray light coming through the windows, and I felt something I had never felt inside a professional assignment. The suspicion that the building was aware I was there and was choosing, deliberately, to show me something. I finished work around 5 o'clock, secured the depot with a new padlock, and drove back to Calvary as dusk thickened around the access road. The trees pressed closer in the diminishing light, their canopy forming a tunnel through which my headlights carved a narrow, bouncing corridor. I kept the radio off. I wanted quiet, but my own quiet, the familiar silence of a truck cab, tires on asphalt, the sound of my own breathing. Calvary's only lodging was the Ridgeway Motor Lodge. Donna checked me in with the same unhurried efficiency as the evening before. When I asked, casually, whether there had been any history of break-ins or trespassing at the depot, she shook her head. Nobody goes out there. Roads too bad. Nothing to see. But when I asked about any unusual reports, anything at all, over the years, she looked up over her reading glasses and studied me with an expression I recognized as cautious appraisal. "You're the county man," she said. "Doing the assessment." I confirmed. She slid my key across the counter. "Just do your work and come back before dark. That's my advice." She offered nothing further. In room 7, I ate a gas station sandwich I'd bought that morning and barely tasted now, showered in tepid water that ran rust-colored before clearing, and sat on the bed with my laptop. I spent 2 hours digging through transit history, archives, until I found a scanned copy of the Southeastern Trailways Regional Timetable, effective March 1987. The Knoxville to Calvary afternoon service, scheduled arrival 12:15 p.m. The Louisville route with stops in Elizabethtown, Hodgenville, and Campbellsville, scheduled arrival July 40 p.m. The announcements I'd heard matched within 2 minutes and 1 minute respectively, within the margin of a bus running slightly behind schedule. Within the margin of reality, I closed the laptop and stared at the popcorn ceiling while the baseboard heater ticked. Through the wall, the muffled audio of a television game show bled in from the neighboring room. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once and then thought better of it. There was an explanation. I would find it. Tomorrow, Thursday. I woke at 6:30, dressed, and drove to Poole's Diner at the gas station on Calvary's main road. Eggs cooked hard, white toast cut in triangles, black coffee in a thick ceramic mug, worn smooth at the rim from years of refilling. The waitress called me Han, with neither warmth nor coldness, and refilled my cup without being asked. 2 older men in work jackets occupied the window booth, discussing livestock prices in low, steady voices. I ate slowly, letting the mundane reality of the diner settle over me like a blanket. Paid cash. Left a $1 tip on the counter. Drove east. The depot looked subtly different in Thursday's overcast light. More solid somehow, more present, as though it had drawn closer to the road overnight. I unlocked the doors and entered, and before my eyes adjusted, my nose registered the change. Coffee. Not the sharp bite of a fresh pot, but the softer, rounder scent of coffee brewed hours ago, and left to cool. Still warm, still recognizably human, still absolutely impossible. In a building, without power, without water, without a single functioning appliance. I searched the building, top to bottom. Every room, every closet, every maintenance hatch. The cafe counter stood bare, its utility connections capped where equipment had been removed decades prior. No food wrappers, no bedding, no cigarette butts or footprints. The only tracks in the dust were my own from the day before, clearly traceable from entrance to hallway to bays and back. But in the lobby, 3 of the plastic chairs showed impressions, not all 3 adjacent, spaced along the row, seemingly random. Shallow depressions in the seat dust, the shape of thighs, the deeper compression at center where weight concentrates, the lighter marks at the front edge where knees bend. I checked the floor around each chair, undisturbed. No footprints leading to or from the seats, no scuff marks, no drag lines. Something with weight and human shape had compressed the dust on those seats without physically approaching them. I photographed the impressions, knowing the images would prove nothing. Then I placed a digital audio recorder on the ticket counter, aimed its microphone at the nearest ceiling speaker, pressed record, and turned back to my structural work with the desperate concentration of a man building a wall against the tide. At 9:15 a.m., the PA system activated, arriving Bay 1, Southeastern Trailways service from Lexington. 9:15 a.m. passengers, Goins, D. Shepard, L. Watts, A. Watts, K. I held still and cataloged every detail with professional discipline. A woman's voice, middle-aged, with Appalachian vowels and the muscular fluency of long repetition. Practiced but not mechanical. There was breath in it, personality, the imprint of a real person, performing a real function. And beneath the surface, audible only if you were listening for it, a tautness, a constriction, like a voice speaking, while something inside, the speaker, was trying very hard not to scream. When the announcement faded, I checked the recorder. Flat line. Absolute silence. I played it back with the device pressed to my ear. Nothing. Not even ambient room noise. The announcement had occurred 15 feet from the microphone, and the machine had registered nothing at all. Something fractured inside my rational framework. Not a collapse. A structural crack. The kind that doesn't bring a wall down immediately, but that changes the load distribution permanently. I spent the next 2 hours in the ceiling crawl space, in maintenance chases, tracing conduit, inspecting junction boxes, walking the exterior perimeter. I searched for batteries, transmitters, Bluetooth speakers, any device planted by human hands. I found spiders, mouse droppings, paper wasp nests. Silence. Nothing functional, nothing that could produce sound. At 12:18 p.m., the Knoxville arrival was announced again. Same voice, same bay, different names. Passengers, Collett, H. Banks, W. Sizemore, F. Sizemore, E. I wrote each name carefully in my field notebook. Then I locked the building, drove to Calvary, and walked into the public library. A single room behind the post office, staffed by a quiet, thin man in a flannel shirt named Glenn. He helped me search the county's digitized records. I fed him the names one by one, and he entered them with two-fingered precision. Roy Donnelly, Margaret Prater, James Prater, Thomas Harmon, Dorothy Goins, Lester Shepard, Alice Watts, Kenneth Watts, Howard Collett, William Banks, Franklin Sizemore, Edith Sizemore. Every name appeared. Every person was dead. Roy Donnelly, April 1987, single vehicle accident. The Praters, January 1987, house fire. Thomas Harmon, September 1987, heart failure. Dorothy Goins, August 1987, pneumonia. Alice and Kenneth Watts, 3 months apart in 1987, stroke and liver failure. The pattern was absolute. All dead, all in 1987. Different causes, different months, different locations across the county. No common thread except one. Every person on the list had, at some point during 1987, passed through the Calvary Depot. I sat at the library table, under the buzzing fluorescent light, and felt the pressure building behind my thoughts, like water against a dam. Glenn asked if I was all right. I told him I was fine. Then I asked, with a neutrality I had to construct deliberately, word by word, whether he knew anything about the depot's history since its closure. He leaned back. The metal chair creaked. He studied me with the expression of a man who has navigated this exact conversation before and knows precisely where it terminates. "You mean, do I know about the announcements?" he said. He told me the story in pieces, the way people in that region share difficult knowledge. Carefully, with pauses long enough to let each fragment settle before adding the next. The announcements had been noticed around 1992, hunters sheltering from rain. Then a few curious locals who went to investigate. Some heard the PA system. Some sat in the empty lobby for hours and heard nothing. But those who heard it all described the same phenomenon: arrival announcements with route information and passenger names, broadcast through a building with no electrical service. "People out here don't panic over things like that," Glenn said. "They manage by not engaging. You don't go to the depot. You don't talk about it more than necessary. You leave it alone." He paused, turning a pen between his fingers. "But the names, every name anyone has ever heard in that building belongs to someone from this area who died in 1987. All of them, no exceptions." I asked why that year. He shook his head. 1987 was the year the depot started dying. Greyhound buyout, schedule cuts, the whole system winding down. But it was also the year an unusual number of people in this county died. 43, in a population this size, in 12 months. Heart attacks, strokes, accidents, infections, scattered across the entire year, not an epidemic, but a statistical anomaly, as if something were moving through the community, choosing. I asked about formal investigations. A researcher from the state university spent a week here in 2004, he said. Heard the announcements twice. Equipment recorded nothing. Published a paper attributing the phenomenon to auditory hallucination, infrasound, sensory deprivation, geological vibration. Never came back. I asked one final question, the one that cost me the last of my professional distance. Has anyone ever heard their own name? Glenn watched me across the desk. The fluorescent tube hummed. Outside, a truck passed slowly on the main road, its engine fading into the autumn afternoon. You should finish your assessment and go home, Mr. Marin, he said quietly. I drove back to the depot instead. The light was softening toward late afternoon when I arrived, the sky turning that particular shade of amber gray that precedes early autumn dusk. I unlocked the doors and stepped inside, and the atmosphere had shifted decisively. The air was heavier, not just stale, but dense, carrying a physical resistance, as though I were wading into something rather than walking through it. And the quality of silence had transformed completely. It was no longer the passive quiet of an unoccupied building. It was attentive, focused, the silence of something that was fully aware of my presence and was waiting, with enormous patience, for me to understand what I was standing inside. I set up recorders in 3 locations. I positioned my phone on the ticket counter, filming the nearest speaker. I verified everything was capturing. Then I sat down in one of the plastic chairs I hadn't used before, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. The lobby dimmed by degrees as the sun moved behind the trees. Dust motes drifted in the narrowing shafts of light. The phantom coffee scent lingered, fainter than the morning, but present, persistent, wrong. At 4:50 p.m., the speakers activated. Arriving, Bay 3. Southeastern Trailways service from Bowling Green, 4:50 p.m. Passengers, Hall, N. Skidmore, G. Marin, B. The sound moved through me like cold wire drawn slowly through the center of my chest. Marin. B. My father. Bernard Marin. Born in Ohio, raised in Indiana, spent his working life in suburban Kentucky north of Louisville. Died in 2019. Pancreatic cancer, age 67. Never lived in Hardin County. Never set foot in Calvary. No connection to this depot, to Southeastern Trailways, to any of the names called alongside his. Did not die in 1987. Did not fit the pattern in any conceivable way, and yet his name came through that dead speaker with the same practiced, professional precision as all the others, as though he had always been on the manifest, as though his seat had been reserved. I sat motionless in the chair as the lobby darkened around me. My pulse was audible in my own skull, not racing but heavy, deliberate, each beat tolling like a slow bell in a building where time had detached from its normal axis. And beneath my pulse, rising through the concrete floor, through the metal chair legs, into the bones of my pelvis and spine, that low vibration, not sound, exactly. Something prior to sound, as though the building itself were breathing with a mechanical, subterranean patience that predated language. I checked every recorder, flatlines. All three. I reviewed the phone video. Footage of me sitting in a chair, my head tilting upward, my expression shifting through something that cameras can capture, but words cannot. The audio track was immaculate silence. The announcement had filled this room, and the machines had preserved nothing. I packed up my equipment, locked the doors, drove back to the motel in thickening dark with my hands at 10 and 2 and the radio silent. I didn't eat dinner. I showered under barely lukewarm water, dressed, and sat on the bed, holding my phone for a long time before dialing. My mother answered on the third ring, slightly distracted. A cooking show murmured in the background, the comfortable sound of someone else's kitchen. We talked for 30 minutes about nothing that mattered. Her garden, a neighbor's new dog, a recipe that hadn't turned out. I didn't tell her that her late husband's name had been spoken by a voice from 1987 in a dead building in a town she, D, never heard of. I just needed her. A living voice, a present voice, a voice tethered to the world as it is, not as this place insisted it had been. After hanging up, I searched the remaining names. Nora Hall, Calvary, 1987, cerebral hemorrhage, age 71. Gerald Skidmore, Calvary, 1987, farming accident, age 54. Both real, both verified, both dead nearly 4 decades. But my father, Bernard Marin, he broke every rule the pattern had established. Wrong year. County, wrong cause. He was an anomaly, and in structural engineering, the cunt. Anomalies are where the model fails, the point where you must either revise your understanding or admit that you are looking at something your understanding was never designed to contain. I should have left that night. I should have driven north in the dark and filed a bare minimum report from my kitchen table. But I need you to understand the specific, destructive stubbornness of a man who has spent his entire adult life trusting that the physical world behaves according to knowable rules. I was not frightened. I was furious. I felt the building was running a trick. exploiting a blind spot in my perception, and I was certain that with the right measurement, the right angle, the whole illusion would collapse. Friday morning. Day 3. I ate at Pools one last time. Coffee, eggs, toast, the waitress, the silence, paid. Drove east under a sky that was finally brilliantly clear. Sunlight cut through the canopy at a low, sharp angle that turned the roadside leaf litter to hammered copper. At the depot, I abandoned the structural assessment entirely. I searched for documentation instead. Every drawer, every cabinet, every storage space. In the bottom of the filing cabinet, beneath a geological layer of yellowed timetables and route maps, I found a ledger. Large, cloth-bound, the green cover faded to dusky olive. Passenger log, in precise black ink on the front. The binding cracked faintly when I opened it. The entries were meticulous. Columns for date, bus number, route, bay, passenger name, direction of travel. The same neat, forward-slanting cursive in blue ballpoint throughout one hand, sustained over 25 years, from 1962 through December 1987, a quarter century of human movement, cataloged one name at a time. I turned to 1987 and cross-referenced. Every name from the announcements appeared. Every person had traveled through Calvary Depot that year, on documented dates, on specific routes, heading towards specific destinations. They had sat in these chairs. They had heard their names called. They had boarded. They had departed. And later that same year, days, weeks, or months later, they had died. Not at the depot, not together, not from a common cause. Separately, individually, in their own homes and hospitals and vehicles scattered across the county and the calendar. The only thread connecting 43 deaths to one another was this building. Every victim had passed through it during the final year of their life, and the building had retained their names the way stone retains heat, absorbing them slowly, releasing them long after the source was gone. And now it was playing them back, announcing arrivals for passengers who would never arrive in any way that the living could witness. As though 1987 had never ended within these walls, as though the schedule were eternal, I turned to the ledger's final page. The last passenger entry was dated December 22nd, 1987. Wyatt F. Bus 208, Louisville, Bay 2 departing. Below it, separated by a double line drawn deliberately across the page, was something else entirely. Eileen Riddle, depot attendant, final shift. And beneath that, in the same handwriting but altered, letters smaller, pen pressed harder, the strokes carrying a visible tremor. They keep arriving. I can hear them in the bays. The buses are empty, but they keep arriving. I have been here since 6 a.m., and I have announced 11 arrivals, and there is no one on the buses. The doors open, and no one gets off, and the manifest says there should be passengers, but the seats are empty. I am going to lock the doors and leave the key under the mat. I cannot stay here anymore. Something is wrong with Bay 6. December 22, 1987, the winter solstice. The longest night of the year. The depot would not officially close for another 3 months, but Eileen Riddle ended her service here. On this page, with this warning, she walked away from a job she had performed with visible care and precision for over 2 decades, because the building had begun operating without passengers, ghost buses, full manifests, and something wrong with Bay 6. I drove to Glenn's library that afternoon and asked him to search one final name, Eileen Marie Riddle, born 1938, died January 3, 1988, cause of death, exposure, found by a rural mail carrier on the access road to the Calvary Depot, a quarter mile from the building, early morning, on a night when the temperature had dropped to 14 degrees. She was wearing her Southeastern Trailways uniform. Navy blazer, name badge, sensible flat shoes. No coat, no vehicle at the scene or at the depot. She had walked from town, 9 miles through freezing darkness, and she had died on the road before reaching the doors. She had gone back. Whatever had driven her out on December 22nd. The phantom passengers, the empty buses pulling into bays with their doors opening onto nothing. It had not been enough to hold her away. 12 days later, she returned, drawn back to the building that had defined her life, and she died trying to reach it. I thanked Glenn. He nodded without speaking. I sat in my truck in the post office lot and watched the small, ordinary movements of Calvary at dusk. A woman carrying groceries, a child on a bicycle, a yellow dog inspecting a culvert. I stared at these images hard, deliberately, banking normalcy against what I already knew I was going to do. I drove back to the depot. The light was nearly gone. The building's brick had turned the color of dried blood in the last moments before dark. I unlocked the doors and entered, and the interior had transformed. The air was no longer merely heavy. It was thick, almost viscous, carrying a resistance that I felt in my lungs with every breath. And the silence had become something else entirely. Not an absence of sound, but a presence of attention, vast and focused and patient, as though the entire structure had oriented itself toward me like an eye turning in its socket. I walked to the double doors at the back of the lobby and pushed through into the bus bay area. 6 bays stretched away from me, the numbered signs on their concrete pillars barely visible. In the gloom, the only light was a pale rectangle at the open end of the awning, where the lanes met the access road and the last of the sky still held some gray. I walked toward Bay 6, and as I crossed the space between Bay 4 and Bay 5, the temperature changed, not gradually, a line in the air, sharp as a wall, beyond which warmth simply ceased. The cold on the far side was unlike any cold I've experienced in nature. It was not wind chill. It was not shade. It was the cold of profound fundamental absence, as though heat itself had been surgically removed from this volume of space. It entered through my skin and settled immediately in my bones. My joints stiffened, my fingers curled. My breath did not fog because the cold was not atmospheric. It was interior. It originated in my own chest and radiated outward, and there was the sound. The diesel idle, louder here, more articulated than I'd ever heard it. I could separate its textures, the rhythmic clatter of valve lifters, the deep throb of a large displacement engine at rest, the soft, steady exhale of exhaust from a tailpipe I could not see. I felt the vibration in my breastbone, matching some fundamental frequency of my own body. Bay 6 was empty. Bare concrete, faded painted lines, white borders, yellow center stripe. Nothing there, and something enormous. The PA system activated. Arriving, Bay 6. Final service, unscheduled. 5:07 p.m. A pause, the longest I had encountered. A held breath expanding to fill the entire Bay area. Passengers. Another pause. Marin J, my name. Surname first, initial second. Alphabetized. Efficient, expected. As though my ticket had been purchased long ago by someone who knew, with absolute certainty, that I would eventually arrive to claim my seat behind me through the double doors in the lobby. Footsteps. Multiple sets. The unhurried rhythm of hard-soled shoes, dress shoes, work boots, low heels, crossing vinyl tile. Walking to the plastic chairs, sitting down. The creak of old plastic under sudden, real weight. The settling of bodies. The small, unconscious sigh of people who have been waiting a very long time. and have just learned that the bus is finally here. I did not turn around. I knew that if I looked through those wire glass panels, the lobby would appear empty, and I knew, with a certainty that bypassed every rational structure I had ever built, that the lobby was full. That the dead of 1987 were sitting in those chairs, patient and quiet, waiting to board. At the edge of Bay 6, I heard the hiss of air brakes releasing, the deep groan of a vehicle settling on its suspension, the heavy, definitive clunk of a passenger door folding open. I could feel the open door in front of me, a rectangle of deeper cold, a passage, an aperture in the air, through which something that was not wind was flowing outward, touching my face and hands with the patience of an invitation that has no expiration date. The building was operating, performing its designed function with the same mechanical indifference it had maintained through 26 years of regular service. Transit point, threshold, the place between where you are and where you are going. It had never stopped. The power was cut, and the staff was gone, and the schedules were canceled. But the building itself, the architecture, the geometry, the accumulated weight of decades of human passage, continued to function. Buses arrived, names were called, doors opened, passengers boarded. The only change was the nature of the passengers and the destination of the route. 1987, the year the living stopped coming, the year the dead began. I stepped back one step. 2. The cold released me in layers, peeling away like wet cloth. The engine sound diminished. The sense of the open door receded until it was just air again. Just the ordinary, breathable air of an autumn evening in an abandoned building. I backed through the double doors and looked at the chairs. Empty, of course. Dusty plastic in fading light, but 3 of them, always the same 3, were clean, dust freshly compressed, surfaces faintly warm to the touch when I pressed my trembling palm against the nearest seat. I left the building. I locked the doors. I drove to the motel with my headlights cutting through full darkness and my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached for an hour afterward. That night, I called Linda Hargrove and delivered my report in the flat, controlled voice I use for all assessments. Structurally sound. Recommended for demolition on grounds of obsolescence and liability. I did not mention the announcements. I did not mention Bay 6 or the Ledger or Eileen Riddle walking 9 miles through a frozen January night to reach the building that was calling for her. I drove home Saturday morning, October 5th, clear sky, open road, radio playing songs I could not hear. I stopped for gas near Elizabethtown, one of the stations the Louisville route had serviced, a name the voice had spoken, and stood in the sunshine watching ordinary people live ordinary lives, and I wanted to rejoin them so badly it felt like grief. That was 11 months ago. Every day since, at exactly 5:07 p.m., I hear the announcement, not through speakers, not through walls. It originates in my chest, in the precise location where I first felt the vibration of the invisible engine idling in Bay 6. The voice is calm, professional, practiced, arriving Bay 6, final service, unscheduled. And then my name. Every day, the voice is fractionally louder. I have tracked this with instruments, with notes, with the compulsive precision of a man who still believes measurement can protect him. The change is imperceptible day to day. Over months, it is undeniable. The voice is closer, the source is advancing. Bay 6 is not a fixed point on a dead-end road in Hardin County. It is a destination that follows its route, that travels to wherever its passengers are waiting. I've seen audiologists. I've had scans. I see a psychiatrist who writes prescriptions I fill and take each morning. Small white pills, chalky on the tongue, powerless against the 5-7 call. The doctors use words I understand: tinnitus, hallucination, stress response. I accept the words. I swallow the pills. I know what I heard. The depot still stands. Demolition stalled by permits, reviews, budget disputes. The building endures. The PA speakers hang in their brackets, aimed at the empty lobby, wired to a dead system that has never stopped broadcasting. Last week, I obtained the complete 1987 death registry for Hardin County, 43 names. I've heard 39 announced. The remaining 4 are either still waiting for their bus, or they boarded long ago on an afternoon when no living person was present to hear the pliant call. I've read about liminal spaces, transitional architectures that exist between states, hallways, terminals, gates. Theory holds that these spaces absorb the psychic energy of transit over decades. Thousands of people passing through in states of anticipation and departure, carrying the emotional charge of movement between lives, and the structure soaks it up until it reaches some critical saturation. I don't fully believe this, but I think about Eileen Riddle, 26 years behind the microphone. Her voice woven into the building's function so thoroughly that the two became inseparable. She was the voice of the depot, and the depot became the voice of her. And when she tried to leave, it called her back through 9 miles of killing cold, and she died on the road still answering. And I think about 1987, 43 dead in 12 months. Not plague, not disaster, just death, moving through a small population like weather, selecting one name at a time. I have one more thing to tell you. 3 days ago, I was driving through Louisville for a meeting. The route took me past the Greyhound station on West Muhammad Ali Boulevard. Glass, steel, digital boards, everything modern and functioning. I was not thinking about Calvary. I was thinking about traffic. As I passed, I heard it. Through closed windows, through city noise, through everything. Arriving, Bay 6. Faint external. Not in my chest, but in the air, coming from the direction of the bus station. I pulled over, hazards on, hands on the wheel. I sat and listened as the city reassembled itself. A horn, the hydraulic sigh of a transit bus departing, a delivery truck. The voice was gone, but I saw the arrival board through the terminal windows. Digital display, cycling routes in clean modern type. Cincinnati, Nashville, Indianapolis. And then, at the bottom of the rotation, in a different format entirely, older, blockier, the harsh mechanical characters of a mid-century split flap board. Calvary, Bay 6, unscheduled, arriving. I read it 3 times. Then the display cycled and it vanished. The board was normal. A woman at the bus stop checked her phone. A pigeon landed. The world was ordinary, but I saw it. And the implication is the thing I carry now, like a second pulse, the knowledge that will not dissolve, no matter how many pills I swallow or how many doctors tell me the word hallucination. The Calvary Depot is not a haunted building. It is not a contained anomaly you can demolish or fence off. It is a system, a transit system. And like all transit systems, it has routes, schedules, and stops. And the route is extending. The system is expanding. Bay 6 is no longer a concrete rectangle at the end of a dead-end road. It is in service. It is mobile. And it is adding stops. I don't know where Bay 6 goes. I don't know what boards the bus when the door opens, or whether there is a destination, or just the endless idling of an engine that will never arrive, because arriving was never the point. I don't know why 1987 is the frozen year, or why the dead of that year are the ones still being called, or what it means that my father, a man who died 32 years later in a different city from a different cause, appeared on a manifest beside them. But I know my name is on the list. I know the voice is closer today than it was yesterday. And I know that every transit system, no matter how abandoned, no matter how many decades its routes have been officially canceled, eventually completes its circuit. The last thing Eileen Riddle wrote was, "Something is wrong with Bay 6. I've thought about that sentence every day for 11 months, and I believe she was right, but not in the way she intended. Bay 6 is not malfunctioning. It is not haunted or corrupted by some outside force. It is working exactly as designed. It was built to receive arriving passengers, and that is precisely, flawlessly, tirelessly what it does. The problem was never that something went wrong. The problem is that something finally started working, and it has not stopped since. It is 4:50 p.m. as I write this. In 9 minutes, the voice will come again. Tomorrow, it will be louder. The day after, louder still. Each day, the distance shrinks by some increment too small to measure, but too real to deny. And I find myself wondering, not with panic, not with the clean energy of fear, but with the heavy, eroded resignation of a man who has exhausted every rational defense. Whether there will come an afternoon when the voice is so close, so clear, so present in my body, that I will understand it not as sound, but as instruction, not as announcement, but as summons, and whether, on that afternoon, I will stand from wherever I am sitting and pull on my coat without deciding to, and walk to the truck and drive south through the autumn light. Past Elizabethtown, past Hodgenville, past Campbellsville, down the state highway to the narrow access road, through the tunnel of silent trees, over the cracked and buckled pavement, into the empty lot where the weeds grow through the seams, toward a building that has been waiting for me since the moment I first walked through its doors and allowed it to learn my name. The buses are still arriving at Calvary Depot. The names are still being called. And somewhere in Bay 6, a door is open. I think it's been open for a very long time. And I think it's patient. I think it can wait as long as it needs to. After all, the schedule says I'm arriving. And the schedule has never been wrong.